If you want to turn your podcast into a revenue-driving asset, then this is for you. Kurt Elster hosts the Unofficial Shopify Podcast. He's been podcasting for over 10 years, and he's managed to turn his podcast into a key lead generator for his business. And in this episode, he shares his expertise around podcasting and also how podcasters can make money selling products online. So if you want to hear some top tips from a podcaster who's been in the game for a long time and advice on how to turn listeners into revenue, then this one is for you. So you started podcasting with the Unofficial Shopify Podcast over 10 years ago now, which is quite long in podcast years. And Shopify, the platform that your podcast is based around, by the looks of it, it was only around 8 years old at the time. So how did you sort of get into this space, and why did you choose a podcast as your kind of main, I'm presuming it's one of your main marketing tools that you use for your business?
No, absolutely. Yeah, for sure. The podcast is top of funnel. And I'm selling professional services largely, right? And we had an agency business at that time, and we were 5 years into it, but we had not long prior, we had discovered Shopify, and then we decided, we just kept, our most successful projects were Shopify projects. And so we said, you know what? Let's double down on that. Let's only focus on that. And at the same time, I had started to appear as a guest on some podcasts where they're largely about like agency life, owning a digital marketing agency, an online agency. And at the end of those, people would go, "You're a natural. You should start a podcast." Because podcasting was not what it was today, right? There are just a lot fewer of them. It was a little more unusual. And I think "You're a natural." A lot of that was probably just like them hearing nervous energy, because truthfully, it made me quite anxious to appear as a guest on a podcast at the time. Now I don't think twice about it. But having that encouragement, and then knowing we needed a way to fulfill these Shopify leads and then establish expertise and authority, it just felt like a natural way to do it. But I was like, man, the hard part here seems like editing, And my business partner at the time goes, "Oh, I used to edit the Onion's AV Club podcast." I said, "What?" I didn't know that. And so, now it's like, okay, I have absolutely, no roadblocks in my way that are stopping me, because the guests were my colleagues, were my friends, were people I knew, that we were already talking about and doing this stuff with. And so it really became a very natural thing to start and do. And then at the time, we said, well, we're going to do an info product, and that worked very well. We don't do info products anymore, but it was kind of like, let's try and distill everything we know and then interview people, about those topics. As it worked out, it was slow going, but, ultimately worked out well. And the title, it was just a working title. I said, we got to come up with something better. And we just never did.
And do you remember back then how many other podcasts were specifically around Shopify? Because you got in there early with that.
I don't think any other than, maybe Shopify had official one, Shopify Masters.
I remember that.
They had that one. And then the others were all like, they all went broader. They all just did eCommerce. They did like the industry vertical, whereas I picked platform. And, maybe people resisted at the time because that seemed too niche. Today, it doesn't. Shopify's like number one for this space. And you could niche down like within Shopify Podcast at this point. But back then, I knew the power of having a niche. It was easier to have like a laser focused positioning statement, about who you're speaking to and what you're speaking to them about. That always helps, sure. Right? And so at that time, Shopify seemed like a good niche.
It seems like the title might have helped you anyway. Like, I don't know what Shopify is like as a company, but I know some people have had trouble using brand names in their titles. Like, I know LinkedIn is a bit funny with this. Like, if there's a podcast LinkedIn in the title, they'll get, angry letters saying, can you...
Yeah, understandably. I think, it was 100% it's intentional on their part. I mean, they knew it. They're on top of it. There's no way. I didn't sneak anything past them. They chose to let me continue. And at any time, that is a risk. At any time, they could say, hey, that's our trademark. You don't get to use it anymore. That's the risk I take. And there is an advantage to that in that, it kind of holds my feet to the fire. I am obligated to produce good content, respectable content. Something I think I do anyway, but I don't know. I kind of like having that sort of Damocles hanging over me. But I wouldn't recommend it, if I had to do it over again, right? Like it just creates extra risk and liability. To their credit, they've been, quite accepting of it. It's never been an issue, right? Like they'll even, introduce me to guests. That's always been helpful, right? Like they are participating at this point.
Yeah, that's fair. Like I don't want to go too far into this tangent, but just in case there is anyone listening who's, thinking of using or already using a brand name within their content. I mean, you could always, change it. It's not the end of the world. Like I know somebody who has the person who has a LinkedIn podcast, he changed the name to Informed and they were happy with that. So I'm sure if Shopify did change their mind, then there's probably a workaround where you don't lose all that 10 years of progress.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, if it did happen, I assume I would get a polite but stern email, and then I'd say, okay, well, here's what we're considering changing it to, and if they agree to it, then we would we would just move forward and change the title. It would not be the end of the world, And we've had the other issue we had in the past was not properly licensing music was a problem. And that's a mistake people make. Now we use Soundstripe to get proper licensing, but we had to go back and edit it out. And that resolved it, but it's like, okay, we just ended up making extra work for ourselves. Because when we started, 2014, we didn't know better.
Yeah, I think a lot of those things back then, people wouldn't have known necessarily. Like, there's always been a low barrier to entry with podcasting, and it's much less of a walled garden than some other types of content. So, but even now, I've heard a podcast on quite a big network, and they were using like a piece of a Paul McCartney song in their intro, and I was thinking, really, do you want to take that risk? And they did actually have to change it in the end.
Yeah, doing something like that, you're just asking for trouble. Ours turned out, we didn't know. It's like, that's actually owned by Universal Media Group. And so it's just like, you just get the automated thing. But, you don't want Spotify to take it down. You don't want YouTube to take it down. And so you just have to go back and fix it. But you're talking about that barrier to entry. Man, when we started, I spent $30 on a USB microphone. So it wasn't a good one. Recorded in a room with a cathedral ceiling. So I just had the worst room echo ever. And then and now edit in Audacity, which is free open source software that's wonderful. And our host was Simplecast, which if I recall correctly was like $12 a month at the time. And so it really was truly quite inexpensive to get into. And back then there was not the obligation of YouTube video, right? And so that drastically simplifies things. And
just before we get any further into this, I'm just wary that there might be some listeners who have never heard of Shopify, and this isn't a sponsored episode or anything like that. But do you mind giving like a brief description of what exactly Shopify it does for people? Thanks.
Sure. So Shopify, largest by market cap company in Canada, so big deal, and 8,100 employees, so quite a large organization. But it's SaaS, software as a service. You pay a monthly subscription fee, and they will host and run your online store. They have point of sale software as well. So essentially, if you're running a retail business, whether it's probably online or even in person, Shopify gives you hosted software as a service to run it.
Okay, thanks for that.
And we get all the time we hear people confuse it with Spotify. It is not the music streaming service Spotify.
I imagine. I think they use green. They both use green, their branding as well, which doesn't.
Oh yeah, I never thought of that. Yeah, it's like green and white logo.
And even though it's an unofficial podcast, you've had Shopify team members on as guests. Is that right?
We had Shopify president on.
Okay, so they're.
Yeah,
they
Harley
must be
Finkelstein.
happy with what you're doing there. I mean, it's good for them. Was that kind of early on that did you have to build up some traction before you could get access to these guests?
For sure, I had to build up traction. Like, absolutely, I did. But I've always been. This is before the podcast. I was a Shopify partner. I was an early in that ecosystem, and it helped that I was at the time active in those online communities on social media. And so, when I started that, it wasn't like some guy no one's ever heard of is doing it. It's, this partner who has an active voice, who has been a proponent, who uses the tools. Like, it was clear if they were going to allow this to occur that I had the bona fides. I had established my expertise there.
And then how did you make those partnerships happen, or did they kind of do the work there? Did they find you?
I was always fearful to poke the bear, right? I didn't want to be like, hey, like obviously they do, but no, I was fearful. They reached out to me. They did. And it's like building any relationship, working together over time, it got better. And now, that relationship is pretty good. Like they want to be able to sign off on like show notes for accuracy. They want to be able to promote the show. So we work with them on like, okay, well, who's the guest? All right, what's the outline? And like when you're dealing with a PR person, I don't know if people are used to this, but if you're interviewing a guest, and they're represented by PR, often the PR person will want to sit in. And that's where like some software, I assume Squadcast supports this, that you're using, that lets you add they call it like a producer link, where a person could sit in and listen and talk, but their channel isn't recorded. And so it's like, okay, if someone says something, you could, or needs like an answer to something, they could jump in.
Nice. Okay. And then how has this kind of helped your business? You said it's like the main sort of top of funnel marketing channel. Did you start seeing return on investment early on, or did it take a few years, and has it just sort of grown since then?
No, it's funny. It's right away we found people reaching out and going, hey, heard you on the podcast. And, a lot of it is other Shopify partners, which they're not necessarily going to hire us to do the things that they already know how to do, but it's like, it's a helpful resource for them. And so for those folks who listen, it turns into word of mouth, where it's like, oh, I know and trust that guy, and we kind of know what they're about, and so they are willing to make introductions, and so you get leads that way. Or people who sought the podcast out, listened to it, and then they, when they start, they probably don't have the need, but then at some point when they do, they'll go, oh, like right away you're top of mind. But no, it was very quickly, like within months, we started to get regular leads, referrals, people reaching out, going, oh, I heard you on the podcast, or like, oh, my friend is this developer, listens to it, and he said I should talk to you. And so, that's very helpful, both in getting the leads, but then also expanding the network, like discovering new people, or just people who want to be guests, or, you have these interesting conversations. And it became continuing education for me. Like I learn a lot doing these interviews. It's really, it helps to be curious.
And for anyone listening who's starting to think, I wish I could do this, like, I've got, maybe they got a coaching business or similar, or they sell products. How have you had to do anything to turn those listeners into leads, or is it just the fact that you sort of got in there early and niched down and it just sort of naturally happened? Or, do you put any specific call to actions or anything, a lead magnet, anything like that to kind of move them through the funnel?
I'm like one of the worst salespeople. Everyone wants authentic content now, but that was true. That's always been true. It's just something we're aware of and hear about now. And so I think a lot of content creators who are successful want to protect their audience from slop, from garbage. And so I'm really resistant to promote myself in my own podcast. It's got to come up naturally. And so for sure I could promote myself better. I absolutely could. But, it ultimately long-term at what cost? And so, no, I really... in the show notes we do it, and then if it comes up organically, if it makes sense to the conversation, it's not shoehorned in there. I can mention like our own experience, like, well, this is the work we did, and so that gives people a sense of like, they for sure they have a sense of, what my approach is just based on listening to the interviews. But the other way we do it is like, all right, if I want to generate leads, we'll do a Ask Me Anything episode where we have a Facebook group. Ask, hey, what questions do you have? Like what's, and then we do, my business partner and I that sit down and record. We have a good time, a really fun episode where we'll talk through those questions. And those episodes, because it's very much focused on like our experience and our authority, that's the thing to demonstrate. Those are the ones that will then generate the most leads. They're fun to record. They just are.
Yeah, I think if you do it right, people will just want to get in touch with you anyway. Like I've heard some people who are doing a kind of coaching model or consultancy, and they'll guest on podcasts and they'll give a few sort of tips and that out. And then the host will ask something like, so how does how does such and such get started with this? And then the guest will say something like, well, if you want to know that, then you need to book a call with me or buy my book or such and such. And it's like, no one's going to want to get in touch with you if you haven't shown that you can give all that value, if this is the first time you've heard of them. Whereas with what you're doing, you're just giving so much value, and there's always personalized value to give that you can't do that on the podcast. So it's not like you can ever give away everything.
Yeah, I think the mistake is to think that you have to hold stuff back intentionally and then like force them into a lead magnet funnel. I don't like that approach. You know, it is much easier. I could ask an electrician, hey, how do I rewire my house? And he can explain it to me in great detail. He could even give me a printed manual step-by-step on how to do it. And once I get done reading through that, I will know who I should hire, right? Like just the fact that that is demonstrated for me and explained, and even if I understand it, all I've understood is, well, now I understand the absolute amount of work that this will take and the benefit of having an expert handle this for me so I don't have to worry about it. Assuming, you know, I have the budget for it, right? And I don't think you could give away too much information.
Yeah, and it's like, I think it's like basically any niche, like you know, health and fitness. You can talk about exercises and diet and all that stuff, but there's always going to be people who still want a personalized plan and someone to keep them, you know, keep them on top of things and personally, and which you can never get just from the podcast. Moving more into your expertise in terms of Shopify and e-commerce, if there's anyone listening who have thought of monetizing their podcast in that way, so selling certain physical products online, or maybe they do it already and they're using a different platform, it's not working for them, where would you start? So is it, you know, they got to start their own website first and get the plugin, or what would be the first step for starting an online shop?
For sure, you want the audience first. You know, ideally, like that. I think that's why you see a lot of content creators, influencers, start as, you know, pure, I am building an audience. Email is ideal. You know, if you could build a newsletter, that is the best. But more than likely, you're starting with social media. And then, you know, once you have that audience and they know what you're about, okay, where's the overlap? Like, what do you know is the product that fits, you know, what the audience is into, what you're into, right? If I make a YouTube channel about Legos, well, maybe I could start selling, you know, custom Lego kits or like LED kits for Legos. That'd be perfect. But, you know, like if I've got a Lego kit and then I start selling train sets, it's not going to work. But I think it's always audience first for any kind, whether, you know, content, business, product marketing. I need the audience first. Otherwise, you're just screaming into the void. Like you're selling to no one, right? You can have the most beautiful website in the world, but if you have 0 visitors, it's not going to help you any.
Yeah, I get that. And these platforms cost money, you know, like when I first started putting out courses online, there were certain platforms that I was looking at and some of them, you know, are like 50 quid a month. And it's like, if I start paying 50 quid a month before I've built that audience, I'm just going to be losing money. So yeah, that makes sense. And how can they use their podcast? One, you know, say they've built the audience, they've getting a few hundred listeners to their podcast, or, you know, a few thousand followers on social media. They've put their shop together. What's the next step? Is it paid advertising? Is it? Well,
I think there's
whatever. What do you think?
I think there's a few ways to go about it. One is build in public, where, and it depends on what the format of your show is, right? You know, if it's like a vlog style, you know, more personal, like face to camera monologue, then you do build in public, where you talk about, you're like, hey, you know, I've got this audience, I've got this passion, I've got this thing I'm about, and, you know, I'm really interested in building, you know, trying to evolve this. You just be totally honest and candid. Trying to evolve it. I want to grow it in business because this is what I want to do full time. This is what I love. And people will relate to that enthusiasm, assuming you're genuine. You know, don't fake it. And, you know, start talking with like, hey, we got to build an online store. You know, like that whole process, they're with you on it. And so by the time it comes to you ask for the sale, you say, hey, you know, it launched. We're doing, you know, a pre-order sale. Only our listeners get access, or like you get a special coupon. It won't come as a surprise to them. I think that's the mistake people make. Is like you're doing one thing and then you blindside the audience with, by the way, give me money. And they're like, where, you know, what are you talking about? And and then it falls on its face and it's confusing. Whereas, if I spent the time warming them up, leading them up to it, introducing that idea, taking them on that journey with me, then I think you would see a lot more success. The other way to go about it is, let's say you've got, the newsletter, you're able to get the business going, you have an existing business, and now you're adding this content marketing component to it. Then you probably have customers you have good relationships with, people you like, people who, customers who are developing friendships with. Then highlight those people on the show, and it becomes, it's like a case study, but it also becomes social proof. It becomes relatable, where there's like, okay, now there is a third-party person that is acting as an audience surrogate, where I can relate to them, and if I do, then I go, you know what, maybe I should try whatever that product is. Maybe it's, like a training regimen, weight loss program, something to that effect. Okay, I relate to that. Now I'm interested, now I'll buy.
And so I'm presuming you work with clients who have all sorts of different marketing platforms. Like, do you have some clients who use a podcast as marketing, or is it mainly email and social media like you mentioned?
I'd say for almost everyone, email and performance marketing, paid ads, are going to be what drives the most of it. But I find, in those emails, you got to put something. And so having content certainly helps. Of our clients who have done podcasts, the problem, no one commits to it. No one sticks with it long enough to really see the value and the results. And I think that's troublesome. Especially you want to use all parts of the podcast. Like if I'm going to do a podcast, all right, I want to do video, I want to do audio. Okay, so now I'm on YouTube and I'm syndicated on all these podcast channels. If I'm that far, all right, let's make that a blog post on our website for SEO. And now let's take that clip, let's cut it down and turn those into social posts. Also, let's send out a newsletter about it. Okay, so now I made one piece of content that has turned into 10 pieces of content, because the thing that's important here is impressions, is frequency, right? I need each person, for them to buy, that they need to see my brand, that story, that message, probably 7 times. 7 times before they're even going to recall. You're just screaming into the void, repeating yourself over and over before anybody cares. And I think that's the thing people miss. It's like you're just going to spend a lot of time talking to yourself before anyone cares what you have to say or even remembers it.
Yeah, and I guess depending on what kind of products your clients are selling, video could be more important when we're talking about physical products here, the video component. But I might be wrong. Like, what are your clients normally selling on Shopify?
We have I'll give you a good use case. We have a client, we've known them for years, love them, Tactical Baby Gear. Tactical Baby Gear, fun name, but they sell these these very masculine, tactical looking diaper bags and baby carrier. They have a baby carrier that looks like a plate carrier, but you strap your baby to your chest. And they're good products. They're fun, they're different. Occasionally social media gives them a hard time for being super masculine. But the intent is good. The intent is let's give dads more options. Let's find they're fun gift products for new dads to get them involved with their babies, to get them warmed up to this idea. And so they also, the guy who owns the thing just loves video production. He's great at it. And so he does YouTube videos where they try and provide great advice for new dads, or interview people about their parenting experiences. And that's great content to make. And then they present that as like a YouTube channel, as a podcast. I think that stuff works. They've also done like vlogs, like behind the scenes, a day in the life of. And I think that stuff helps as well, especially for making you relatable. People buy for people, not brands, right? And going face to camera, I get is difficult, is challenging. I didn't want to do it. But eventually you just have to, and you get over it. But it makes you relatable.
Yeah, it's a really good example. And I think it's difficult for some people to find that link when they have a business, just from businesses that I've spoken to when they're starting a podcast. Just understanding what your ideal client wants. So not like, right, we've got this tactical baby gear, let's start a podcast on baby gear, because that's not specifically what they're searching for.
Yeah, it would be, you'd run out of content very quickly.
What the other kinds of people who buy this, what content are they looking for, what problems they need solving. So like you say, a podcast with advice for new dads, specifically marketed towards dads along with the products, and building it that way, and then eventually they'll find your products without having to push it if the content's good.
So I think what helps is to have a mission statement. So for me, I know my mission is to enable entrepreneurship. It's very simple. If I can, I am a big believer in entrepreneurship. I love the independence it has provided me. I want to make those opportunities available to more people. And a lot of it is just about encouragement, is about people knowing that that's an option, that they're not forced into working for someone else. You could, if possible, you could take the risk and attempt this. Having that simple two-word mission statement, enable entrepreneurship, it makes it very simple to understand like what should and shouldn't be a podcast episode, right? Even though it's the Unofficial Shopify Podcast, I cannot strictly talk about software features in every episode. That's a lot of it, but it's like, okay, what's the things that will enable the people that are listening, to the same common end goal? And for Tactical Baby Gear, same thing. It's enabling dads. It's getting new dads involved with their kids, getting them excited about having a baby. And so, all right, once you know that, it's all the same target market, right? Entrepreneurs will probably need an online store, right? And so it just works out. Same with, the dads. They're going to buy a diaper bag at some point. They're going to buy a stroller or like one of these things. And so when they come to do that, the Tactical Baby Gear guys could have never particularly talked about their products, but they'll remember it. It'll come up. It'll be top of mind.
And you'd mentioned about a lot of people you speak with, they quit their podcasts before they start seeing that ROI. Do you see that with business owners in general with their Shopify stores, or is it specifically podcasts? You see people quitting earlier than they probably should if they want to get anything out of it?
Well, I think e-commerce, I have success bias, right? For me, it worked out. And so it's very easy for me to go tell other people, well, you just got to keep going, because that's what I did. And then suddenly it clicked and it worked. But for sure, you probably want to go longer than you think. And I think consistency is key. There's, people say like, oh yeah, no, I have a podcast and I'm still going with it. Well, how often do you publish? Oh, like sometimes once a month. There's no sometimes. That's like kiss of death for podcasting. You got to have a consistent schedule. Ours has been every Tuesday, and without fail, it has published every Tuesday for years at this point. Sometimes, when you're doing that, the episode will not be ideal. Other times it will be amazing. But until you go through the work and keep publishing them, you won't figure it out. I think, and then the other problem, like that, a little more e-commerce specific, all of the tools in e-commerce are very good at analytics and attribution tracking. Your email software will be very happy to tell you, here is how much revenue people who clicked on your emails generated. And Meta will do the same thing for your Facebook ads. But podcasting is extremely difficult to have attribution. It's physically disconnected. It's air gapped. I listen in Spotify and then I go, load the website up separately of that. There is no connection between the two. The best you could do is like a landing page or a discount code. But even then, it's not, there's a lot of breakage. It's not going to be perfect. And so they're kind of trained to look for return on investment, to look on return on ad spend. And podcast just doesn't have a good way to do it. And so it's an easy thing as a business owner to just deprioritize. Like, I got other stuff to do today. There's always fires. There's always something you got to deal with. So, we'll do that podcast next week. And next week comes around. We'll do it next week.
Yeah. I've been doing podcast audits recently for business owners, particularly recruiters. That's one area we work with. And there was someone, their business's podcast has been going for about 5 years now, which is pretty good. But they've said, there's been no return on investment, no leads that have come out of the podcast. But then we have a look and it's like, you haven't really been podcasting for 5 years because there's only been sort of 4 or 5 episodes per year sort of scattered throughout whenever they get the chance. So it doesn't really count. It's like once you pick a schedule and stick to it and then keep going, then we'll start the count from there and then we'll see if there's any growth. Hearing
you explain it, that example, it's like going to the gym. I've been going to the gym. Wait, have you been going to the gym or do you have a gym membership? Because those are two different things. It's like, okay, you're paying the hosting bill and then you show up once every other month. I don't know why I'm not getting results. Like, this one's not too tough to figure out.
Yeah, it's always the first thing I look at, the consistent. Cool. Okay. Well, I just want to ask you a couple more things. Firstly, you've been doing this for quite a long time, so I'm sure there's been lots of lessons along the way. If there's one thing that you wish you'd have done right from the start that would have helped, you reckon would have helped the podcast grow and help the business, what would you have changed about the podcast?
I mean, normally my answer to that question is consistency. Because when we started, we had kind of a false start where we're like, we'll do seasons. Yeah, okay. And so it's like we started and then there's a gap and then we started for real. And the thing I should not have thought that I should have started earlier was getting a paid sponsorship. Whether or not, it's a large sum of money or not, the magic of that was what bred the consistency. Because now the podcast episode is a client deliverable. If I don't deliver that podcast episode every Tuesday, I have to refund the sponsor or sponsors. Okay, well, your sponsors aren't going to stick around real long if you're not delivering. And, who wants to give up the money? And so that, I was resistant to it at first, but I think it added legitimacy to the show. A show that is sponsored feels more legitimate potentially than one that's not, if someone's willing to pay to sponsor it. But it also makes it a thing you have to show up and deliver. And that's, gets you to that consistency. And so I think, my answer is consistency, but also the sponsorships to force that.
Nice. Yeah, no, that's a really good tip. And for those who aren't interested in getting a sponsor, you can even take that as just, is there any other way you can find some kind of accountability partner? Whether that's, another podcaster, a co-host you work with, or another podcaster, or just, a particular fan that can't wait for your next episode, like having some accountability. But yeah, a sponsor, if you're making money from it, that's definitely a powerful one. Cool. Okay. Well, really appreciate all your insight on e-commerce and on podcasting. Where can people find the podcast if they want to know more, or if they want to get in contact with you and learn?
Sure, of course. Search the Unofficial Shopify Podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We're on all the networks. Or Google me, Kurt Elster, and my website, kurtelster.com. I've got a newsletter and just links to my socials and all that stuff. I'm active on Twitter and LinkedIn.
And yeah, I've had a listen to the podcast. The audio quality is really good, which is always a plus in my book as an audio guy. So yeah, definitely one I'd recommend if anyone does want to know more about e-commerce and Shopify specifically. No worries.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Thanks again, Kurt. Take care.
Thanks for listening to Podcasting Amplified. If you enjoyed today's episode, please leave a review on your favourite podcast platform. We'll be back next time with another conversation offering more insights to take your podcast to the next level and help you to achieve success. Happy podcasting.